thing called Vamo with Vanessa Morgan? And
I don't think that was me, actually.
really amazing. Oh well, c'est la vie.
I'll say it was me. It sounds like a fun time.
Well, she had a producer um, named what was who was it? It was Jacob.
Okay.
So I got it mixed up, and his name was Jacob Craig.
Jacob,
So
Really?
you got somebody out
yes,
there horking your name, man.
I know.
right.
My identical
So
twin.
So
My evil twin.
Howard, how this is going to work is we got about 38 minutes to work with here with Zoom. So
oh
what we're going to
great.
do is we'll start the show. We got a little ad to do at the front, and then we'll have our music. You may not be able to hear the music, but then we'll come back in. Me and Jacob will introduce ourselves. Then Jacob will introduce you, and we'll just have a conversation. It's not really, interview type thing. We'll just talk about, your career, pretty much anything you want to talk about. You don't have to worry about cursing or anything. We don't care about any of that. Just whatever you
Oh
want to
good,
talk
good,
about.
good, good, good.
So if you drop an F bomb,
So
don't
that
worry
allows
about
me
it.
my complete vocabulary,
Yeah.
not my degonatified vocabulary.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So Jacob, I guess I'll do the ad read this week. So
All right.
all
Sounds
right.
good.
Well, I'm ready if you guys are.
I am.
All right. Here
I'm
we
ready.
go. In 3, 2, 1. Hello there, everyone. You know how we do this show? You know how we keep going? Because of people like you. Go over to patreon.com/OM podcast. Help us keep the show on the air. Help us keep the lights on. And we got to eat. We can't eat without your help. So go over there and throw us a couple of bucks a month. And you get early access to episodes and extra episodes every single month at every tier. So if you like the show, go throw us a couple bucks a month. Patreon.com/OM podcast. Merry Christmas, you hooligans. You know what that music means. It is time for the Open Micers podcast. My name is Jason Robbins.
I'm the better half, Jacob Craig.
Yeah, he is.
And our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, was a music publicist in the 1970s and 80s for many famous acts, including Prince, Billy Joel, and Styx. He is also a published author of 7 different books about different topics, including his life, all kinds of amazing things that we're going to talk about tonight. Please welcome Mr. Howard Bloom to the podcast.
Woo!
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Jacob.
Man, it's
So, what should we discuss tonight?
Ooh, man. Well, first off, let's start off by, you were a publicist back in the day, and I just want to go over some of this list here, okay? Like, you got Michael Jackson, you got Cyndi Lauper, Talking Heads, Lionel Richie, ZZ Top, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Simon and Garfunkel, John Mellencamp, Earth, Wind and Fire, Kiss, Bob Marley. How did you have time to do all this stuff, man?
Well, that's a good question because I'm at heart a science person.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about rock and roll
Yeah, you
when
started
I first
off-
got involved.
You started off with an interest in cosmology and microbiology, and you went on to be an assistant researching the immune system at the Roswell Park Memorial Research Cancer Institute.
Wow, you got this background down.
Is there
Yes,
anything you
and I
haven't?
had a side interest from the time I was 13. And that side interest was in the transcendent experience, the
Wow.
ecstatic experience. And I was into that for 2 whole years. And then I heard of a book called Varieties of the Religious Experience by William James. And that was the very title I would have picked for what I wanted to do. So I spent 4 months tracking down a copy of the book. We didn't have Amazon in those days.
Mhm.
Buffalo, New York, my hometown, was not exactly a book-rich city. And I finally found a copy, and it was like William James was writing this book to me. And many years later, at NYU, when I graduated with 4 fellowships, and they were fellowships in grad school in a field that didn't have a name yet. I was going to have to paste it together myself. Today it's called neuroscience.
Wow.
Wow.
I had a sudden realization. I've been working my ass off in college because I was really humiliated. The first year of college, For the first 2 semesters, I got 4 A's and only 1 B, and that humiliated me. So I decided to do everything in my power to eliminate any more B's, and I figured out something. You know, I was studying the textbook first when I was preparing for an exam and ignoring my notes. But if you study the notes first and then you look at the textbook, your notes have the ideas of the teacher. And what is the teacher really looking for when he's grading an exam? He's looking for ego gratification. He's looking for you to parrot his ideas. So I reversed the order and
Hey guys.
Yeah.
My computer
We're
wasn't
not recording.
Oh,
great.
Oh,
Okay.
Jason Robbins.
It wasn't me. It's this program. It was rolling, but then I looked at the recording and it wasn't moving. Let's do this real quick. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Stupid computer. And my other computer's on the fritz. That's why I'm doing.
Oh God.
Here we go. All right, 3, 2, 1. Whoo! Do you like this show? Do you want more of it? The only way we can do it is by people like you. Head over to patreon.com/ompodcast and throw us a couple bucks a month to keep the lights on and keep us fed. Patreon.com/ompodcast. Merry Christmas. This is take 2 here at the Open Micers podcast. My name is Jason Robbins.
I'm definitely his better fucking half, Jacob Craig. And our guest, once again, after his, answering already 2 questions 5 minutes into the podcast, is Mr. Howard Bloom. He was a music publicist in the 70s and 80s for bands such as Prince, Styx, Billy Joel, and has published around 7 different books. We'll talk to him. We'll try to cover as many as those of those as we can today. Please welcome Howard Bloom to the podcast once again, everybody.
Thanks,
Howard,
Jacob.
I'm
Jason.
I'm very sorry for Jason.
32 episodes and I haven't messed up yet. So let's just count. Let's
explain to the audience what we're talking about. So there we were, soaring mightily 5 minutes into the podcast, covering territory you wouldn't believe. And all of a sudden, Jason looks at his computer and realizes it's not recording. And we have to start all over again.
I'm so sorry.
My most abusive relationship is with my computer. I have my girlfriend on the phone with me all day, and she has to listen to me arguing with my computer, cursing at my computer, infinitely frustrated at my computer because I designed my first computer. I co-designed my first computer when I was 12 years old. And in those days, a computer was the size of a townhouse. And it won some science fair awards. So I have expectations of a computer, and I expect it to do everything instantly. That's what I hoped for back in the 1950s, when I was working on this first computer of mine. And guess what? We have added zillions of individual transistors to the microchip since that time. We have gone infinitely beyond what existed then in the way of software. And your computer still refuses to do the logical thing, and it never, ever works instantly.
You know what you need to do? You need to write that algorithm. You need to write that algorithm to make computers like the recording program I had. I hit record, but there's 2 counters. One that said that they should be going at the same time, but one of them was not moving. For some reason, it was not recording, and I don't know what happened. But
right. But hey, the saving grace of all this is we are live on Twitch, correct? So the YouTube version of this episode is going to be everything we said before Jason royally fucked up.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to us on Libsyn, go check out Jason Robbins' YouTube channel to watch the full podcast and all that.
Instead
of writing the ultimate algorithm to solve this kind of problem with computers, I've written the ultimate theory. It's called the Grand Unified Theory of Everything in the Universe, including the human soul. And then the producer of a Judas Priest film came along and said, that's not the correct name. If you really want to get at what your theory contains, the title has to be The Grand Unified Theory of Everything in the Universe, including sex, violence, and the human soul.
Wow.
So that's what I've got. And it's taken pretty seriously in some circles. I have a collaborator in theoretical physics at the Keldysh Institute of Applied Mathematics of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he says this theory is going to force us to throw away everything we know in modern math and start all over again.
You're going to make me have to learn a new math.
No, this is a simple theory and it's all in English. There's no math in it. So that's a little something I've been working on since I was 12 years old.
Fantastic.
And it's taken seriously enough. There's a movie. It's called The Grand Unified Theory of Howard Bloom. It's a 66-minute documentary. And it's won 2 awards. The guy who made it, Charlie Hoxsey, is the winner of 3 Emmy Awards. And the film, The Grand Unified Theory of Howard Bloom, has won Best Picture at the Design Science Film Festival in California. And it's won Best Feature-Length Documentary at the Knopf Film Festival in Italy. So, and there's a Howard Bloom Institute in the process of formation where this Grand Unified Theory is taken fairly seriously.
Yeah.
Wow.
So long story short, you're the smartest guest we've ever had on
Yes.
the podcast.
I don't know about many things. I am dumb as a brick.
What does that make us?
Well, when I get to my refrigerator and I'm looking for the milk, I can't find it. And when somebody comes over and tries to help me, it turns out I couldn't find it because it was smack dab in the middle of the refrigerator on the top shelf in the most visible location in the entire refrigerator. So that's how stupid I am.
So when we started out, we were talking about you had a really big career as public relations publicist for Michael Jackson, Cyndi Lauper, Talking Heads, Lionel Richie, ZZ Top, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Simon & Garfunkel, John Mellencamp, Earth, Wind and Fire, Bob Marley, and Run DMC. And that was interesting enough. And then you hit us with all the neuroscience. Let's start that over again so everybody can. It's amazing.
So all of this rock and roll activity was a very, very lucky accident, and it happened because I got into science at the age of 10. There was a book that was open in my lap in my family's living room in Buffalo, New York. And it was a book I'd never seen before. You know the location of every one of the books in your house because your parents always keep them in exactly the same place. And this book had never been there before. And I opened it and it said the first 2 rules of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the story of Galileo being willing to go to the stake to defend his truth, which 30 years later I would find out wasn't true. Galileo's friend was the Pope. And he abjured. She said everything he'd ever written was wrong in order to get 9 years of house arrest instead of the stake. But I needed the heroic, mythic version of the story. And that's what I got from this book. And the second law of science, the second rule of science, it says, is the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And look for things that are invisible to you, that you and everybody around you take for granted. Flush them into the realm of visibility and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who invented the microscope and who used it to look at pond water and discovered that we were sharing a world with an entire separate world of invisible animals. He called them animalcules. So we were skipping. And then when I was 12, I accumulated my first scientific credentials. I mean, at 10, I started in microbiology and theoretical physics, thanks to Galileo and von Leeuwenhoek. When I was 12, I co-designed the computer that won a bunch of science awards. I built my first Boolean algebra machine. I was schlepped off to the University of Buffalo to meet with the head of the graduate physics department. Now look, what graduate physics department head wants to waste time with a 12-year-old? Give me a break. So my guess is it was supposed to be a 5-minute courtesy meeting to throw a sop to my mother. But it turned into an hour-long meeting because we were discussing the hottest topic in science at the time, Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift. And when we came out of his office, he put his hand on my shoulder, stood behind me, and said to my mom, "You don't have to save for grad school for him. He'll get fellowships in grad school in theoretical physics, any school he wants." So I was off to a good start, and I was being tutored in outside the box science by the guy who designed the valves, the head of R&D for a company called Moog Valve Corporation, that made the valves for the first plane to break the sound barrier, the Bell X-1, and the first plane to take a human being to the edge of space, the Bell X-2. And when I was 16, as you said, I was doing research at the graduate or at the largest cancer research institute in the world, the Roswell Park Memorial Cancer Research Institute. And I came up with a theory at the beginning, middle, and end of the universe that explained or that predicted dark energy, something that wouldn't be discovered for another 38 years. And if you go on YouTube and you look up Howard Bloom Big Bang, you'll see a 5.5-minute animation of the theory. It's so simple, it's ridiculous. You'll get it immediately. And it's had 800,000 hits. So the question is, how the hell did I get from that into rock and roll? And the answer is, at the age of 12, I became fascinated by the transcendent experience, by the ecstatic experience, by the kind of religious experience you get when you're in a holy roller church and you're seized by Christ, and you end up frothing at the mouth and jerking up and down and finally writhing on the floor, just in the grip of the God, in the grip of Christ. And I took off on a scientific expedition looking for the gods inside of us. It wasn't the only thing that I did, because I've been published or have given lectures at scholarly conferences on 12 different scientific fields. So everything from quantum physics and cosmology, which you would expect, to evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, systems dynamics, information science, and of all things, governance. So I try to take all the sciences, and instead of becoming a specialist and digging gopher holes so deep that all I can see is the darkness around me and the dirt next to my eyeballs, I try to soar over the landscape of all those specializations like an eagle and use those gopher holes as pixels in a big picture and see the grand landscape. That's my job in science. So here I was, fascinated by the ecstatic experience, and many years later, I graduated magna cum laude Phi Beta Kappa from NYU with just what the head of the graduate physics department had predicted: fellowships at 4 different universities, except they weren't fellowships in theoretical physics. They were fellowships in something that didn't have a name yet, called neuroscience. I was going to have to paste the program together myself. And I had a sudden realization. I've been in school for a very long time at this point. And if I go to grad school, it's going to be Auschwitz for the mind. Auschwitz, the concentration camp where people were killed, burned or gassed in an oven. And it's going to be concentration camp for the mind, because I am fascinated by the ecstatic experience and how it fits in to this vast panorama that comes from all of the sciences. And if I go to grad school, I will never get anywhere near that experience at all. I will be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students in exchange for a psychology credit. And how many ecstatic experiences are you going to see in that room with 22 college students? Zero, zilch, never. And I had an opportunity. I had been grabbed by the poet in residence at NYU in my junior year. And he said, "Look, Bloom, wait until everybody else leaves the classroom, close the door, sit there," pointing at the bawling out seat. "I need to talk to you." So I waited until everybody left. I closed the door. I sat in that seat. He said, "Look, you, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year, I'm telling you, you are the literary magazine. You are the editor of the literary magazine, and you don't even have a faculty advisor. The minute you walk out that door, you're it." And so I now walk out that door. So when I walked out the door, I looked incredibly confused, and another kid came along who I didn't know and said, "You look upset about something. Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I've just been named the editor of the literary magazine," because my view of literary magazines was this: they're horrible. They have these eggshell blue covers that will put you to sleep. They have a choice of typeface that indicates absolutely no sense of aesthetics on the part of the person who chose it. Literary magazines are so soporific, so sleep-inducing, that if you found a room with a rip-roaring orgy, and you threw a literary magazine into that room, the room would empty in 5 minutes. So, so this student said, well, why don't we go for a cup of coffee? Now, no kids ever want to be in Buffalo, New York, and my parents didn't have time for me and didn't have the interest. And so I never grew up among human beings. My bedroom in Buffalo had lab rats, guinea pigs, and guppies. And lab rats, guinea pigs, and guppies don't do normal human rituals like having a cup of coffee. So I had no idea what that was. But I meekly followed him down to a coffee shop, ordered a glass of water. He ordered a cup of coffee, and he asked me one of the most important questions I've ever been asked in my life. If you could do anything you wanted with this literary magazine, he said, what would it be? And I answered a picture book. So in addition to going out and finding a crew of literary people as a staff, I found a staff of artists. And when I graduated with those 4 fellowships, it was the beginning of the summer. I hadn't gotten a summer job yet. I walked into the apartment of the best of the artists on the Lower East Side, and the room was empty. There were no furniture. It had wall-to-wall carpet, and sitting on that wall-to-wall carpet was my artist, his wife, and his 3-year-old, and they were all crying. And I asked, what's wrong? And he said, well, they've repossessed our furniture. They're turning off our electricity. They're turning off our telephone, and we're being evicted from our apartment. I said, what? Your work is fucking amazing. If anyone sees it, they're going to give you jobs. If you get jobs, you can pay your rent. Give me your portfolio. I'll do it in 2 weeks, and then I'll get my summer job. And he said, well, if you're going to include me, then you also have to include my best friend from Boston who moved down here with me to start an art studio with me. His friend's work was nauseating, but I wanted him to have his rent. So I said yes. And his friend threw in his wife, who was actually a terrific designer. And I started taking the portfolio out. And I realized I was going to every ad agency there was. I was going to every magazine there was. I was going to every publishing house and every music company, every record company there was, trying to find work for these artists. And it gave me a periscope position into the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. It gave me a periscope position into the land where the gods are, into the land of ecstatic experience, into the land ultimately of something I knew zero about, rock and roll. So I took rock and roll very seriously. I was what I really, the story is a long one. We only have 38 minutes, but when I was 12 years old, you know, the other kids wanted to have nothing to do with me. And one day something happened that had never happened before. A girl swiveled her face in my direction. And then she did something even more startling. She made eye contact. And she said, I told my mom, you understand the theory of relativity. Well, frankly, Jason, Jacob, I did not understand the theory of relativity, but there was no way I could confess that, because the only thing I had going for me with my classmates who hated me was that they called me the sickly scientist. So as soon as school got out, I jumped on my bicycle. I pedaled to the local library. The librarians literally knew me better than my mother did, and because I was in there all the time. And I said, give me everything you got on relativity. And they went through the stacks and they shoved 2 books across the desk. And I put them in my bicycle clamp, pedaled home as fast as I could, and started. There was a great big fat book by Einstein and 2 collaborators. And there was a little skinny book by Einstein all on his own. And I had learned at that point in life, I'd been reading 2 books a day since I was 10. And I had learned that if you tackle the most difficult thing, it pays off. If you go through a book you don't think you understand, by the time you get to the end, you have understood something. So I was busy working my way through the big fat book, which is only 7 words of English on a page, and all the rest is mathematical equations. And Jason and Jacob, I have never understood a mathematical equation in my life aside from E equals MC squared. So 8 o'clock came around, and I had a sudden realization. I've got 2 hours until my mom puts me to sleep. And I'm not getting anywhere. I've read 50 pages of this book. I still don't understand the theory of relativity. So I turned to the little skinny book. And in the introduction, Albert Einstein, it felt like he reached out through the pages of the book, grabbed me by the front of my shirt, put his nose up to mine, and said, "Schmuck, listen up. To be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory, then express it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it." So Albert Einstein, my hero, was telling me through the pages of a book, listen up, if you're going to be an original scientific thinker, you're going to have to be a writer, and not just any writer. You're going to have to be a delicious writer. You're going to have to be able to write so well that once people have read the first 2 pages of your book, they can't stop until they get to the end. So when I was taking the work out of my artists, I really wanted to write for magazines. I'd already written for the head of the Middlesex County Mental Research, something or other. I'd written scientific stuff. I'd written for the Boy Scouts of America, which is ironic because I was thrown out of the Boy Scouts at the age of 11 for incompetence at Morse code. And if they'd wanted, they could have thrown me out for incompetence at knot tying. And I really wanted to write for magazines because that's where the kind of writing Albert Einstein had said I must do took place. And I was also co-designing my clothes in those days. It was the late 1960s. You could get away with anything. And so I walked in to the office of an underground fashion magazine that was being bankrolled by Baron Woolman, who had bankrolled Rolling Stone. And when I got out of the freight elevator, it was in the garment district, I expected to open my portfolio on a desktop and have the 3 women in the room ooh and ah. And instead, the minute I got out of the elevator, they stopped dead in their tracks and their jaws dropped. And they looked at the outfit from the designer I was co-designing with and said, "Have you got more of these?" And I said, "Yes, I have a whole closet full of them. Why?" They said, "Do you think you could write an article about these?" And hey, that's what I've been looking for, right? That's what I've been practicing for since I was 12 years old. So I went home that night and I wrote the article and I turned it in and they made me a contributing editor. And then one of the other contributing editors started her own magazine, Natural Lifestyles, and she made me a contributing editor. And so one day I was covering a parapsychology conference. I did 175 articles all told for the first magazine, which is Rags. So for Natural Lifestyles, I was covering a parapsychology convention one day. And I had just gotten a really lucrative gig for my artists. So they had decided to save money for themselves by throwing me out of the studio. So I was suddenly free to do anything I wanted to do. So there I was at a parapsychology conference with a notepad glued to my left hand, constantly taking notes because I have no memory whatsoever. And when something colorful happens, if I don't write it down, I will never remember it in a million years. And a kid walked up to me and said, "How would you like to edit a magazine?" Well, hey, to write for Natural Lifestyles and Rags and still advance the cause of the artist, the studio. I had been getting up at 6 a.m, going naked to a giant Remington manual typewriter. Every key you had to pound with a sledgehammer practically to get it to function. And I had been writing like a madman, then putting on my Susan Harris and co-designed clothes at 8 o'clock, going into Manhattan, doing the work of the art studio, coming home at night and sitting there in front of this manual typewriter again until it was 11 o'clock at night. And I was getting tired. So if I edited a magazine, I wouldn't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning anymore. I could do my writing during the day. So I never even asked what the magazine was about, because if I had written for the Boy Scouts, I wrote their handbooks on stalking and tracking and camouflage. I figured if I love my audience and if I have adequate research materials, I can write on anything. So I went to a meeting with the magazine publisher. We didn't have Google in those days. So you couldn't simply look the guy up to figure out what the hell his magazine was. I had no clue. And when I walked into his office, which had 7 windows overlooking the river, whatever river that is, on the west side or east side of Manhattan. I mean, you could look all the way up and see boats coming down from 2 miles up of the river, and you could see them go down 2 miles down toward the ocean. And he said the magazine's called Circus, and I thought, okay, I've never been enthusiastic about clowns and elephants, but hey, if I could write for the Boy Scouts, I can write about anything.
I used to read Circus magazine back in the '80s when I was a little kid.
Yeah, and then he revealed what it was, a rock and roll magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally reinvented that magazine using my science tools, of all things, and using empathy, using the ability to relate to my audience. While I invented market research techniques to feel out my audience so I could tune myself to their frequency, because emotion is what it's all about. It's not about statistics. It's not just about numbers. And so I created a new magazine format, and my publisher said yes to going with it. And we increased in circulation 211% in 12 months. So that's the Circus. So I was responsible for the Circus that you knew when you were a kid. And then one day I get this big envelope from Chet Flippo, who's one of the founding editors of Rolling Stone. He founded their New York office, among other things. And it had 6 pages of typewritten paper in it. And I wondered, why the hell is this important person sending this envelope to me? It's very expensive to send things by messenger, which is what he had done. And I open it up and read, and it's 6 pages on how this guy working in a converted windowless broom closet managed to do a Rumpelstiltskin, managed to spin straw into gold, and invented, according to Shep Flippo, an entirely new magazine genre, the heavy metal magazine. So that's what I did. And that's what allowed me to get into rock and roll. And it turned out here I was looking for the gods inside of us and the ecstatic experience. And all of a sudden I was in the land where the gods are, because I went to my first Fleetwood Mac concert as a VIP. And Fleetwood Mac was a dying blues band. People don't remember those days. There were 2 major blues bands, Chicken Shack and Fleetwood Mac. Mm-hmm. They were co-equal with each other. And both of them were dying, and we all knew they'd be gone in a year or 2. This is before Stevie Nicks joined the band. And so there was Fleetwood Mac performing on stage. First of all, I noticed what happened with the audience. What happened with the audience is you walk into a concert hall. You're very self-conscious. You take your seat. You want the people behind you and the people on either side of you to think you're cool. So you act as cool as you possibly can. And then the lights go down and the music starts, and you forget about the people behind you and the people on either side of you. And you are sucked into some sort of a fireball, much, much bigger than yourself, that is created between the audience and the performer on stage. And it is the transcendent experience. And then a half an hour into the show, the electricity went down on the stage. The sound went down, the lights went down, everything went down. And the electricity went up, the lights went up above our heads, went up on the audience. So that's threatening to bring back that sense of self-consciousness about thinking only of how the people behind you and on either side of you feel about you, not being part of that larger fireball that takes place when you meld with the person on stage. And Mick Fleetwood, who was the 6'4" gangly string bean of a man, walked to the front of the proscenium, the center of the proscenium, and he said, "Fuck it." He did this without a microphone. But remember, Carnegie Hall was designed to have acoustics before the days of microphones. Yeah. And he said, "Fuck it, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to rock and roll." And that galvanized us. It created an even higher ecstatic experience for us somehow. It brought us into even a larger social hole than we'd been sucked into before. And I knew this kind of experience already, because when I was 16 years old, I was at a high school where it was all the kids who hated me when I was a younger kid, before I got into this fancy private school my parents sent me to because I hated the public schools. And when it came to voting for class president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, those were popularity positions. The most popular kid got to be president. The second most popular kid got to be vice president. The most popular girl got to be secretary, and the most popular Jew got to be treasurer. And I didn't have a shot at any of those positions because I was the least popular person around. But when it came to doing something functional, actually getting something done, these popular kids did not have a clue. And there was a committee that had to get things done. It was called the programming committee. We had 5 school assemblies a week before every single day of class. And the head of the programming committee had to program 2 of those programs and had to MC all 5 of those programs. So I got voted the head of the programming committee 2 years in a row. And at first it was shattering. Your stage fright when you have to go in front of an audience of 350 people who hate you stage fright is appalling. So I went through 2 months of stage fright, and then getting in front of an audience of 350 became as natural to me as breathing. And one day the juniors came to me and they said, look, we're holding a dance. Can you advertise it for us? They didn't realize how absurd this request was. If there was a party of any kind, especially a dance, anywhere in Buffalo, New York, I would cordially invited to keep my feet as far away, preferably Cleveland or Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. So, but despite that, I agreed to advertise their dance for them. So I put a piece of music on the turntable. Now, you have to understand something. I cannot dance. I cannot do the box step. I cannot do the foxtrot. I cannot do the waltz. I'm a klutz. But I got up in front of that audience and started dancing. And because I can't dance, what this audience saw was like a Looney Tune drawn on a night when Chuck Jones had dropped LSD. It was the craziest, most bizarre thing you've ever seen in your life. And I saw the pupils of the audience members dilating, and I saw their eyes widening, and I saw them melting into that kind of collective blob that I was part of at the Fleetwood Mac concerts. And I saw that collective blob of energy reach a pseudopod out to me like a tunnel. And its energy went through me and up to my head. I was having an out-of-body experience. I thought I was seeing this whole thing from the ceiling, watching my body dance. And I saw that collective energy of the audience go up to my head, become utterly transmogrified, and flow back down to the audience again in a continuous feedback loop. So everything I did, their pupils widened even more. Their eyes grew wider. And when it came to the end of this event,
Howard, I hate to cut you off, man, but we're less than a minute left on the Zoom meeting. I wish we had more time. I really do. We need to schedule again for another show. But the one thing I wanted to get to was your recent book was a memoir, How I Accidentally Started the 60s. Can that be bought on Amazon, or do you have a website?
It can be bought on Amazon. And the most recent book is Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, which is my adventures finding the gods inside of us in the world of Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, etc.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have you back on again. Because we were supposed to do this back in October. Of course, we had a hurricane, so we had to reschedule this for now. So thank you again for coming on the show. I'm so sorry we don't have a whole lot of time to do the show. Thank you again for coming on. We didn't even get to a quarter of what we wanted to get to. So let's reschedule for another part 2, and we'll come back and do it again soon. How does that sound?
Will do. Have a great night with no hurricanes.
Yes.
And we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you. And good night, everybody that's watching on Twitch. We will see you guys next week.